October 13th, 2015, a day that will live in infamy for the Destiny community. The Eververse trading company is introduced into Destiny. Announced a week prior by Bungie, microtransactions were being added into Destiny. Bungie would clarify that these new microtransactions would, quote, bolster the service provided by our live team for another year, as they grow and create more robust and engaging activities. This was Bungie's way of removing the few and far between $20 updates like the Dark Below and House of Wolves, and instead provide free updates between expansions, such as the April update and Age of Triumph. These microtransactions started off with a few simple emotes, but would quickly change to bring much more. Eververse has had quite an evolution, changing with the trends of modern gaming and monetization, from addictive loot boxes starting in Destiny 1, to now having bundles that serve as a way to charge extra for multiple items, when people are really only buying that bundle for one specific item. Now, alongside Eververse selling more items than ever, we also have $10 seasons occurring 4 times a year. So how did Eververse get to where it is now? We'll sit back and enjoy as I go through the history of the Eververse store, the items and additions that keep pushing the boundaries of what players will accept, and the current state of Eververse. Some moments from this video are from YouTubers who documented Eververse throughout the years, and their channels will be in the description down below. As I mentioned in the beginning, Eververse was introduced into Destiny on October 13th, 2015, a little under a month after the release of the Taken King expansion. And over 8 years ago now. Feel old yet? There was a large part of the Destiny community skeptical and slightly worried about the introduction. However, the promise of providing numerous updates in between expansions for free was an enticing prospect. At first, the only cosmetics in the Eververse store were emotes, consisting of a total of 18 emotes. There was the Enthusiastic Dance, aka the Carlton, alongside more basic emotes like Slow Clap and Evil Scheme. To calm players' worries, Bungie even provided some silver so you could buy 1 or 2 emotes yourself, without needing to pull out your mom's credit card. A week or 2 later, the first Festival of the Lost came into the game, and with it, the first loot box. Called the Treasures of the Lost, players could get the first one for free, but then would need to spend silver to acquire any more. The Treasure of the Lost bag would drop 1 random event mask, with the coveted Skull Mask being a possible prize. Players could get every mask from the event, with an exception for the Skull Mask, which was only possible to gain from the Treasures of the Lost. These loot box rewards were not on a knockout list, meaning people could spend up to $100 on the treasures and still not get the mask they are hoping for, which was really only the Skull Mask. Most people were really just looking forward to that one. A few more event exclusive emotes were added, such as my favorite, the Zombie Dance. But there was no real change to Eververse, since it would go back to purely emotes after the Festival of the Lost ended. The first real change for Eververse would come that same year, in December, with the release of the Sparrow Racing League. The original Eververse emotes were added to a mystery bag that could be earned once a week per character, but then would have to be purchased for a chance at an emote you liked, and new emotes were being added for direct purchase. Another change and true turn for the worst was the addition of sparrow horns, along with sparrows themselves being added into Eververse. The greatest and most controversial decision that has yet to be made again was making Sparrow Racing League record book essentially Destiny 1's version of Triumphs, an Eververse only item. In this SRL record book, you could acquire an emblem and shader, but the key being the 3 armor sets for the Hunter, Warlock, and Titan, which looked pretty nice and had players angry they couldn't acquire it without spending money on the record book. I'll mention this briefly, but while researching, I came across posts from people who said you could actually get the reward from the record book without buying it if you inspected the book directly from the Eververse store. Not even 3 full months after the introduction of the Eververse store, and Bungie was starting to extend the borders for what the players were willing to accept. The Eververse store wouldn't change too much throughout the rest of the year leading up to the Rise of Iron expansion, although there were a few updates, such as the April update, that changed content of the store, introducing ships into the Eververse, alongside the Spectre armor sets with glows to apply, and the more interesting Taken armor sets. Keep in mind that at this point, all these updates refreshing the Eververse store were free, and came alongside new content that players could enjoy, which still left Bungie being able to show players what their money was paying for. On September of 2016, the Rise of Iron expansion released in Destiny 1. and with it, many new systems were introduced into Eververse. Alongside resetting and updating the emotes, much like previous updates, there were now exotic weapon ornaments in the shop. Alongside the weapon ornaments was an evolution of the chroma system, with new gear sets and ornaments that could be applied to drastically change the look and apply a unique effect. These armor sets were themed around the Iron Banner, and used the ornament tokens you acquired from Eververse would cause the armor to gain flames and look quite amazing. These could all be acquired from the new loot boxes called the Radiant Treasures, but considering how you could only get one free loot box a week, it would take an astronomical amount of time to get everything you wanted, especially considering there was no knockout list for the few items that could drop. Also, a new currency was added to the game called Silver Dust that would be needed to activate the ornaments on weapons and armor. The last major Eververse change happened when Festival of the Lost came back around later that year, as ghost shells were added into the Eververse loot pool, beginning what I feel like was the oversaturation of loot boxes, preventing you from getting what you want most of the time, instead getting a ghost shell, ship, or sparrow. Throughout the rest of Destiny 1's lifecycle, not much really changed with Eververse. In fact, it actually got slightly better. There were now a few more ways to earn loot boxes every week. The Silver Dust currency could now be used to buy ornaments and wouldn't be required to equip them. Pretty much every Eververse item from over the years was now added to one final loot box during the Age of Triumph called the Treasure of Ages, and overall getting the things you wanted started to feel achievable. Now, it was time to see how Eververse would change going into Destiny 2. I've mentioned in previous videos, and it's fairly well known that Vanilla Destiny 2 was a disappointment. And the disappointing state of Destiny 2 Vanilla led players to notice the abundance of items in the Eververse store compared to Destiny 1. Bungie had developed Destiny 2 to be a full-out live service, which is much different than how Destiny 1 started out as a box product. Once players reached the max level of level 20, you can now receive the new loot box called the Bright Engram, which you would receive every time you leveled up your experience bar. While Destiny 1 had a few loot boxes, there were still items you could buy directly from Tess herself. Now, there was no option for direct purchase, and instead you would have to bank on getting what you wanted from the Bright Engram. However, any item you received from your Bright Engram could be dismantled, which would result in the player receiving Bright Dust, the new currency in Destiny 2 for Eververse. This Bright Dust could be spent on the new system of rotating items in a Bright Dust store, which would have its contents changed every week. Eververse still sold all the various items that she would end up selling in Destiny 1, such as an exotic weapon ornament and sparrows, but now, there was an Eververse exclusive customization option called the Transmat effect, which would affect your character as they loaded into a destination. While these were technically in Destiny 1, they were not permanent effects that you could keep forever. There was also a new tier emote called the Exotic Emote, which included new animations and had the player interacting with items. There were a few other consumables added into the Eververse that have since been removed, such as the Fireteam Medallion, which was actually pretty useful and would increase XP and loot dropped from activities. There was also a large controversy, covered by many when it was discovered, since it turns out Bungie was throttling players' XP, meaning that they would earn fewer and fewer Bright Engrams the more they played, proving how Bungie was much more interested in gaining their income from Eververse compared to Destiny 1. Many Destiny players were annoyed that much of the aspirational content that players would normally expect in activities was now all in the Eververse, removing a large majority of the grind that made vanilla Destiny 2 disappointing and slightly boring at launch. Season 2 of Destiny 2, or rather the Curse of Osiris, saw some even worse changes to the Eververse store. The exotic ghost shell was introduced, and only obtainable through engrams, or on very rare occasions being a drop from a quest or activity. Alongside Season 2, the Destiny 1 event called The Dawning returned. There were more items that were only in Eververse, but even worse was the event engram could not be obtained without spending real money, and players would have to hope they had enough Bright Dust collected to buy items they wanted when they eventually came around in the Bright Dust store every week of the event. The Eververse armor for this event was some of the coolest looking armor in the game, and since I barely had any bright dust when the event came out, I ended up making one of the only 2 purchases for Eververse I have ever made. The key being that vanilla Destiny 2's armor was far more dull than what we have now, and seeing the creativity in the original Dawning armor made many players want to acquire it. This event was also a true turning point for community sentiment around Bungie and how they were running the Eververse store. So Bungie made promises to change things for the better. Not only would they stop the XP throttling that had been occurring, but they would even begin adding cosmetic rewards to the core playlists. Although over the past few years in Destiny, it seems they have forgotten about this promise, and only made up for it recently, bringing in the Eververse armor set for that season into the core activities. Early on the next year, during the Valentine's event called Crimson Days, players could now earn the event engram alongside their normal bright engram, calming the community that was in an uproar during the Dawning event only a few months prior. Also, I thought I'd mention this briefly, the seasonal engrams changed for every major content drop, adding in a bit of FOMO as newer items came into the game and older items became harder to acquire. In Season 3 of Destiny 2, or rather the Warmind DLC, I would argue the greatest change for Eververse occurred. Now I'm not talking about even more monetization, but something that allowed players to gain actual rewards they wanted from Eververse. The Prismatic Matrix was introduced, and was an addition to Eververse that brought 10 items that rotated weekly. Upon ranking up for the first time every week for all 3 characters, players could receive a Prismatic Facet, which could be spent to get one of these 10 items randomly. The Prismatic Matrix also had a knockout list, meaning if an item players already acquired was in the loot pool, it would be grayed out and could not be acquired, further allowing players to have a chance at getting what they actually wanted. This was a great moment for Eververse, as there were now avenues for players to get items that were actually good. Things were more of the same through the rest of the season and into Forsaken. The Prismatic Matrix was still going strong. New engrams were introduced alongside events, but for the most part, everything could not be acquired, and this was probably the best state Eververse would ever be in, especially if you consider that Bungie had to regain community trust, so they couldn't simply go in and add a bunch of new items into Eververse without getting destroyed by the player base. I'll skip around real quick and say, in Shadowkeep, there was a new cosmetic item called the Finisher that was added into Eververse alongside finishers that could be acquired from the Season Pass. There are quite a few seasons in Destiny 2, with it currently being Season 23 in Destiny 2, so I'm going to start skimming through some major points. For a good while, the Eververse was in a state that the players could enjoy. However, the Prismatic Matrix that was such a great addition to Eververse was removed, as Bungie said they felt they could do better, although nothing even close to the Prismatic Matrix has been brought back into the game since its removal, which is disappointing. From what I found, it seems Season 7 of Destiny 2, or Season of the Opulence, was when Eververse started reverting to the money-hungry beast that it is today. The facelift of the Eververse store during this season would make it into what it looks like today. Not to mention, the engram introduced with this season, the Best of Year 1 engram, prevented players from getting any new gear as it only contained gear from the past few years of Destiny. And Bungie would remove the ability to get bright dust from dismantling Eververse loot that you received. This would start Bungie slowly lowering how much bright dust could be earned every season and moving it into the seasonal pass, and preventing players from getting more bright dust than what Bungie wants them to get. Things have really only gotten worse over the last few years. There has been the introduction of event passes, locking shaders and emotes behind paywalls, and nickel and diming the community more than Destiny ever has before. And most importantly, the mass production of expensive bundles, including outrageously priced gear that used to be in season passes, and armor sets that can no longer be acquired through the weekly rotating Bright Dust store. As much as the community's sentiment towards Destiny 2 was terrible right now, the only real change to Eververse, as I mentioned previously, was this season when Eververse armor was added into Strikes, Gambit, and Crucible. The Eververse store has been controversial ever since its inclusion, and when Bungie became free to play, it gave them yet another way to justify the ever-expanding selection of cosmetic-only gear in Eververse. Hopefully in the near future, or during the Final Shape expansion, changes will be made to bring Eververse cosmetics into the ritual playlist. Even with all the broken promises Bungie has made about the Eververse store, I still hope that something will change for the better. Perhaps that's foolish, but one has to hope. If you enjoyed this look into the worrisome history of Eververse and Destiny, please like the video and subscribe. Have a good day.